Hello, 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 everyone. Hello from the CMTK podcast. It's been a while since we did our last recording, but as you can hear, we are broadcasting, at least I am broadcasting from the depths of a shopping mall. And TK is here with me.
Yeah,
And
I am right now on a boat on a very famous lake, Lake Champlain. No, Loch Ness, because today we are talking about probably the most famous cryptid of all, the Loch Ness Monster.
yes, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a deep down into Loch Ness because alongside gray aliens, I feel like the Loch Ness monster is a secondary spirit animal to my friend TK here. And so for me, it has always been one of the more vanilla cryptids. It was like, I mean, this is not to berate the animal or its lore, but it was like Sasquatch and Loch Ness monster. So I never knew too deeply, to make a pun, too deeply about the myths of the Loch Ness. I only began to acquire like scatterings of how basically deep this Loch Ness lore is when I was researching these like cryptid videos I was making on other places in this channel. So, but then I realized there's like a different cladistic explanation for every animal out there for the Loch Ness monster. There's an amphibian explanation, there's a slug explanation, there's, I believe, a worm explanation.
Yeah, Tully Monster too.
Yeah, some people believe this Carboniferous bizarre fossil Tuli monstrum is related to the Loch Ness monster. And then there's all sorts of reptiles and
Yeah.
everything.
Also, even like very esoteric things like that it's like a supernatural being or an alien
Ooh,
even.
ooh,
And
I
like
did
people
not.
try to connect it to USO lore. You know what an USO is?
Unidentified swimming object,
Yeah,
I
like
guess.
a UFO, but in water, because if aliens can drive through space, they can probably also build submarines.
I mean, before beginning, we can maybe even deep down a little into USOs. But before beginning, I would like to remind everyone I'm in a shopping mall today. And you know why? I'm in a shopping mall today. I'm having coffee. TK just went to the gym to contribute to our daily lives and just to show your appreciation for this podcast. Please consider supporting my Patreon and TK's Patreon. And we'd be all the more grateful to you. We are very happy with the way this podcast is going on YouTube and on all other platforms. We have already reached 78 million viewers, and we always need more people to join in and support. So take it away, TK. What do you think about like how should we go about exploring the Loch Ness?
Well, let's talk first about how we got to know the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you were a child, like what was your connection to Nessie?
Well, my childhood was exceptional in the fact that I first got to recognize the Lake Van monster, which was the Turkish lake monster found in the eastern province of Van. And there were like these huge news stories about basically a furry headed, antenna bearing, long necked animal like emerging in front of a boat and terrifying the passengers. And then in these news, it was saying like Turkey has its own Nessie. What the hell is a Nessie? And turns out it's the Loch Ness monster. But as I grew up, I read all sorts of 14 magazines and websites and blogs. And it was one of the like, especially in terms of British 14 publication, it was one of the staples of world and dare I say UK Fortiana. And it was always something that was there. And I mean, Loch Ness had a monster in it and it looked like a snake. And that's as far as I got to know it before very recently. And that was so I was always drawn to more obscure things. So because of that reason, well, maybe I kind of let my Loch Ness lore languish a bit. And that was that.
Well, for me, I've as a kid I was a hardcore Nessie believer. After I don't know how I
Mm-hmm.
first heard about it, probably just through regular pop cultural osmosis, but like I read a lot of books about it, and I remember like the first time like a family member showed me how the internet worked. I used it not to look up porn or anything, but to look up Nessie and other cryptids, like what information is there.
I mean, we both had a cathartic interest in gray aliens. So was it as strong as that with Nessie for you?
Well, I didn't have an interest in gray aliens. I had an intense fear of gray aliens, so I would have never willfully looked them up online. But Nessie, the thing with Nessie, of course, is it's stuck in a lake. It can't come here and eat me.
Safe space kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
So I think like that, there is like this one conversation I had with my childhood best friend. I still remember, like we were asking each other, like one day we'll go to the Loch Ness, and then he asked me the very poignant question, like, if you were at Loch Ness, would you hold your finger in the water for even 1 minute? And I was like, no, because in my head I thought the monster would come immediately up and eat my finger.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, lake monsters never scared me in that respect, although I would always hesitate to swim in a muddy, seaweed choked lake, of course. But they were never an object of fear for me. I mean, they were like, there was also always this element of revelation, like you see an animal that no one else has seen, and it kind of changes your worldview. And basically, you change the world's view of the lake. So there was always that kind of revelation aesthetic to Nessie and some of the other cryptids. And I remember, like, dimly, like one of the few things that really got me interested was this flipper photograph they showed.
1972. I think Robert Rines was the guy who published that. It was like a big deal at the time because it even got its own paper in Nature, which is quite an accomplishment for a cryptozoological topic to be published in Nature, which is like the most prestigious.
It's like getting spiritual healing published in an issue of the Lancet or something like that.
Exactly.
But was this the article where they actually tried to name it scientifically?
Yeah, it was exactly that. Like so basically the whole story was that but I think Sir Peter Scott and another guy named Robert Rines, and then I think Tim Dinsdale was also involved. I'm not a huge expert on the exact story, but basically what they did is they put made like a big sonar survey and also put down cameras into the water, and then they published these photographs which looked very much like a long-necked animal deep down in the murky water with like diamond-shaped flippers. And then based on that, they named it Nessiteras rhombopteryx.
And that's one of your internet names, right?
That's a funny thing. Like I think that started when I bought Minecraft and I had to make my own account, and I didn't know any names. So I thought, what was the scientific name of Nessie? Something rhombopteryx, and and I actually misspelled it if you look closely. But it just stuck because I mean it's a very neat name because nobody else has this, because it is a typo.
It adds character, I can say that. I mean, one thing that was very interesting about this whole progression, because there were sightings of the animal at first, and then they did the sonar search, and supposedly they saw things that were moving underwater, and then they lowered the camera and took that photograph. There's an attraction to it from a like everyday media consumer's perspective, that it builds a narrative, and like there's an observation, research, discovery, and that made it more credible. And I mean, when that happened, I was always almost expecting them to like torpedo the actual body of the animal in the next few months or whatever, but no such thing came. What I'm getting at is like, what were those sonar images and what was that photograph? Because that's something I don't know at all.
Well,
for example,
Darren Naish, I think last year, wrote a very good article on the history of those photos. So basically, while the photos as they were published looked very convincing, as it later turned out they were actually enhanced in quotation marks. So like in one, like the famous flipper photo, someone actually like drew on that with a brush.
Airbrush or something.
No, like
yeah.
a physical brush,
Ooh.
like a hairbrush, basically. And like if you look at the original image, it is so amorphous, like you have to really use your imagination to see anything in there. And
Yeah.
it most likely was just like an imprint in the mud, probably made by the camera.
In the world before Photoshop, it was actually very, very common to use like these wax pencils and brushes to like highlight things and bring them out. And actually, there are many cryptid photos that are like so blatantly, obviously enhanced, but people kind of take them as like gospel truth. And what happened of the sonar traces? Like, were they like schools of fish or something?
Probably. Yeah, I think that's the general explanation. Like you couldn't, it was the sonar images didn't like show this like classic Nessie shape. It just showed that something is moving in front of the sensor, and it could have been just a swarm of fish.
This always reminds me of the famous DSL phenomenon, the deep sea layer phenomenon. In the world oceans, immense depths, there are apparently schools of fish that are so enormous. They are called bristlemouths, and they're this like weird, tiny lantern, not lantern fish, but like tiny anchovies that have like these enormous eyes and light organs or whatever. The thing is, these bristlemouth fish are so numerous, they form a fake sea bottom layer when ships survey a certain zone. And I don't know, that was just a kind of sonar biological weirdness phenomena that I somehow felt compelled to include here. But that's really weird. So there's so many of these fish that they, as they move up and down the water column, makes like maybe the water is 10 kilometers deep. I don't know. Makes it look like it's 6 kilometers deep, and
There
that's
is
creepy.
it's like in cryptozoology, it's kind of a common phenomenon to where people mistake many animals as like one big animal. For example, like seals and otters really like to swim in a line behind each other. And if you squint your eyes, it kind of looks like when they do that, the column of otters kind of looks like the classic sea serpent shape, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
with like
yeah.
the bumps and stuff.
Even if you see footage of cows, or in Canada, there are many internet movies of moose swimming in waters.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how alien and reptilian they look like.
And it's also interesting how many like North American lake monsters are described as having a moose head or a camel
Oh,
head.
true.
Like Ogopogo, the cat
Cat
borosaurus.
borosaurus,
That makes
exactly.
it very likely that people are just seeing swimming moose. But what is the plural of moose? Meese?
I don't know. I think
Like,
moose
I mean,
and
goose is geese, so moose must be meese.
Musaim, maybe. I don't know. I think it's moose and moose.
Hockey moose.
But this thing about American lake monsters, I think it's like a whole world entirely, because I, Americans, or at least white Americans and lakes, they're kind of a thing. Like you go to the lake, you go to the lake house, you go to the lake for holidays. There was even like an installment of the uh, phenomenal American Pie trilogy, and half of that movie was set around the lake. There were like lake hijinks.
Or Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th is technically also a lake monster because he drowned in a lake and then came back as a zombie. And like in many movies, it begins like with him emerging from the water.
True. So it's like the lake or the lake house is a deep part of the American psyche, or at least the white and affluent, somewhat affluent American psyche. And it's just every lake in the US has a lake monster in it. Like some of them, what I love most about it is some of them look like snapping turtles, and like 80% of the rest look like regular wormy lake monsters. But I faintly remember, I don't know where I saw this, but there was a map of every lake monster in the US. I think you would know this better than I
think
do.
I know which map you're talking about. Yeah.
And it's just fascinating. And I think there are a lot of social results to be drawn from that, as much as there are biological, zoological, or
the funniest one I know from that map is I think like in Oregon or something. There was this one lake where a lot of people went missing, and So apparently the common explanation for that is that there's a big octopus living in the lake eating those people. And that somehow became a cryptid. And I'm like, how do you go from people missing directly to big ass octopus in a lake?
Oh, yes. I mean, I have no idea, but I think it's very fitting of Oregon, especially if it was close to Portland. You could imagine them being weird in their own quirky way. If that lake was in Texas, it would probably have been like a crocodile or a warmint or something. But if it's in weird Oregon, it's a quirky tentacly octopus. So how did that full-time conviction in Nessie for you move
No,
to?
wait, it's Oklahoma. I just looked up the map. I found it.
Oh, ooh, okay. So there goes my weird Oregon theory. Sorry for typecasting you, our Oregon.
That was my mistake. I mean, Oklahoma, Oregon, both starts with O.
But you know what happened right now? We created another cryptid. We created the Portland, Oregon hipster octopus murder cryptid.
The Oregonopus.
Oregonopus. But the thing with Oregonopus is that it starts life in the redwood trees, slithers down the tree, goes into the lake, and if it, after consuming 20 or 30 hipsters, it crawls out of the lake like a Dagoba yogurt tree and turns into another tree. So there's...
I can't wait for Sebastian Artworks to draw this. He's probably listening to this podcast.
If any of our listeners want to draw the CMTK Oregonian typecast hipster eating octopus weirdo monster, please be our guest and we will feature this on all our social media. But how did that belief for you turn into skepticism? Like, was there a one moment, or did you just like gradually understand?
I think it was like a gradual build-up of that internet research. Are you something okay?
Yeah. I just ordered an extra round of tea. That's all.
Oh, good. I should get a tea for myself too. But anyway, the skepticism grew with that research I did online, because obviously I want to know as much as possible about cryptids and like see if there is evidence that they're real and stuff. And I think I became a skeptic around the time I discovered channels like Trader Explainer.
Our good friend Trey.
Yeah.
So that was a breaking moment.
Yeah. And then of course I also read Tetrapod Zoology and stuff. And also I read Their Niche Hunting Monsters. I think I probably had the biggest influence because it really shows like how little there is actually to many of these stories and how dubious some of the circumstances around them are.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows credulity and I think a desire to believe on people's part. But I'll ask you what, did you have like a community of Nessie friends, Nessie believing friends?
Well, yeah, in primary school, I talked with my friends, of course, a lot about that stuff on the playground. Yeah, like I told you the story about like what if you were at the Loch Ness, would you put your fingers in the water? We asked each other questions like that.
And so did you meet any pushback from them as you kind of left the fold of belief? Because something similar happened to me with UFOs. I had a group of friends we were reading all these UFO books with, so I won't get too deeply into that. But there came a moment when I was like around 13 years old or something, and I was like, some of these images look like they're fake. And back then there was no internet, so it was only based on some like 5 American books we could borrow from the library, literally. And I was like, some of these could be doctored. And then my other 2 UFO friends were like, how dare you question the veracity? Look at these photos. They tested them with every scientific machine known to man. And I was like really berated. So did that happen to you, or?
Like after primary school, I never had that intensely of a friend circle.
Neither did I.
Yeah. And I don't think I had like that many discussions with friends about stuff like that. But like when I was in, I think high school is the American equivalent. But like, what's the equivalent to a gymnasium? To our,
I think it's elementary school or high school.
something like the school you go to before you enter university, basically.
Oh, then I think it's high school, definitely.
Yeah. Around that time, I became like a big fanatic for ancient aliens stuff, and I had similar conversations like you with another friend of mine. Should I say his name? No, I don't think that's necessary. But he was a very good friend. I remember him fondly, and we still sometimes chat. But yeah, he was very skeptical about stuff like that.
And
When
you
it came to like cryptozoology and aliens and stuff. But the funny thing is, he was a Mormon. So when it came to like religious topics, and I became kind of skeptical, the situation kind of shifted.
So you were keeping him in the ancient aliens fate and also injecting him with atheism.
God, yeah, the total shit show now that I think about it. I'm not even an atheist. That's the funny part.
I mean, after years and years, I guess I could say the same. I mean, I think the whole internet atheism thing in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a reaction against this sort of Ronald Reagan type mega churches. And I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of sexual abuse going on in all sorts of religious circles.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like a backlash against that. But I mean, nowhere are we going to get like a future where everybody reads the facts online and then starts singing, science is the only way to know you all. And it's just, I mean, life is more complicated than that.
Yeah. Especially in the US, I think it was also a backlash to like the political effect religious fanaticism had, because like I think like close to 50% of people in the US still believe that the earth is 6,000 years old and the dinosaurs lived with man.
And close to 60% believe they were abducted.
Yeah.
That's America.
Yeah. And the more disturbing thing about this religious fanaticism, I think I talked with this about you in the Halloween episode when we talked about midnight mass, is that many of these people also believe that we are in the end times.
Oh, yes.
And they are actually looking forward to it because then they can be with Jesus and with their family members. And as a consequence of that, they don't care about societal progress or environmental protection because they think it's useless if the world's going to end anyway. And that's a very dangerous way of thinking.
Oh, yes, especially when these people have extreme amounts of power and money. And
especially,
I mean, and I imagine being member of such a church and somehow becoming a missile-based commander or something. Or like a US Navy pilot or something, you know?
Yeah, there was this one survey, like the majority of Christians in the USA support Israel, not because of like geopolitical effects, but because they believe in their interpretation of the Bible that Jews must hold the Holy Land for the end times to begin.
Yeah. So Commerce Armageddon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They want the world to end, and that's a very dangerous mindset.
Oh, yes. But well, actually, the Battle of Armageddon already happened with Turks in it. There's like in 1918 an engagement named the Battle of Armageddon in that very same site between the Ottoman and British armies.
For a second, I thought you were referring to like the period in 2012 where everyone was going crazy about the Mayan calendar.
Oh, and the rogue planet Marduk.
Was it not Nibiru?
No, well, in my part of the world, there was a bestseller named 2012, Rendezvous with Marduk. And apparently this rogue planet named Marduk, after a Sumerian or Babylonian demon or evil god or whatever, was going to come swirling out from the Oort cloud and just play havoc on the world. And in where I am, which is Turkey, this message was picked up by a lot of like modern hippie people. And there was this one incident where a, hundreds of these people congregated near a certain village named Şirince in the western part of the country, which is a kind of permissive place. And it's a place where lots of academics and hippies already hang out together. And they had this like the most debaucherous New Year's parties imaginable. And that was that. And I was working at an advertising agency in that times. And there were even cases where we were coming up with slogans like, I don't know, if it's like for a chocolate bar or something, it's like, try it before 2012, or you'll never get to know the taste of CMTK chocolate bar.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean,
available at our non-existent merch store.
You must have lived through Y2K. How was that?
Ooh, it was.
I was too young to remember it at the time.
I think in the States and the UK, they were crazy about it. In Turkey, it was still eclipsed by this awful earthquake we had the year before. And Turkey was not as digital a country as it is today. So many people were like, okay, computers can get fucked, fuck it, and just life goes on. And I remember around the time there were also the beginnings of a vast economic crisis. So it was like really a dark time in contemporary Turkish history. And I remember like either my father or one of my father's friends saying like, I wish all these computers just fried up so we didn't have to deal with this shit anymore. But many people, like overwhelmingly led non-digital lives. And if they had a digital component of their lives, it was just maybe like going online for a few hours a week or something. It was not a center part of life as it is today. So it would be interesting to see if computer technology had a 20-year head start, then Y2K would be crazy. And the news we were getting were like, haha, look at these silly Americans. They think war is going to start. Haha, computers, zero. And then maybe in like the most like tone deaf corporate circles, they were like, you need to buy this software to make sure your bank computers work safely on Y2K. But I don't know.
Yeah, there was this video by this channel called Lazy Game Reviews where he like documents what was actually happening at the time. And there was a legit concern that like, because many programs were very lazily programmed at the time, so they would not be able to transition from 2000 to 2001, but instead reset back to like 1901.
Yeah.
And there was actually a lot of work done in 1999 to update systems so that these errors would not happen. Yeah, and the funny thing is, many people did fix it, and because everything was fixed, nobody noticed that there was a problem, and that's why everyone makes fun of this now, even though many programmers worked hard to avert mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, Y2K. Did you listen to the Alex Jones Millennium podcast, by the way?
No.
So there's a very famous recording of Alex Jones on the eve of the year 2000. And he's like, ladies and gentlemen, we got news of nuclear reactors blowing up in Russia right now or something like that. But yeah, that was mainly the gist of the thing. Like they were worried that you wake up next morning and you would be hit with a 100-year unpaid debt or interest, and because of that, the computers would go crazy somehow. I don't know. I think there must have been a lot of unsung heroes during that time, who fixed a lot of necessary infrastructure and saved basically what needed saving. But
I know there is at least one case where a guy got like a parking fine for like 100 years because of this.
Well, I mean, once again, back in that day in Turkey, computers were not in that part of the life. I think if you had a parking fine, the record was kept in like some municipality officer's notebook somewhere. So it was Armageddon ready, anti-fragile, that sort of thing. We strayed a bit from
Yeah,
Nessie.
let's go back to Bigfoot. No, wait.
So, Mom, I got a question. What is the most outlandish explanation you have seen for the Loch Ness Monster?
Um, I think, yeah, we actually already talked about this in the strangest alien encounters
Uh-huh.
episode, where like an episode of Ancient Aliens that was about USOs tried
Mhm.
to connect the story of the one-footed snorkel monster to Nessie.
Ah, because it has a snorkel, it looks like an aquatic creature.
Yeah,
Does that?
I think the guy also originally described it with flippers. So
Ah, I think it's a kind of like almost like Pokemon classification. Like if it has a flipper and a long neck, it must go in the lake monster
yeah,
class.
exactly.
I think
Wait, let me. At this point, a little advertisement for my Patreon. Memo has gifted me a drawing of Snorky that
yeah.
my Patreons can look at on my Patreon page.
Yes, please everyone support TK Sivgin on Patreon and you can see this spectacular image of Snorky. I actually like on my channel I chill out for my Patreon mostly, but on these CMTK episodes, TK is really the heart and soul of this podcast. And so if you're in a charitable mood, please consider supporting him first. And then I can somehow fan for myself until the next episode. Well, that was that.
Thanks.
So, I mean, for me, I think the most outlandish explanation has to be this giant mollusk or like Tule monstrum kind of thing.
To be honest, low key, I always thought that was the one that made the most sense because look here, I have it right here in their niche book.
Ooh, I'm
Because
looking at this amazing picture. Let me describe it to you. There's like a lump, and on one end, there's a little eye like protrusion. And from slightly below the eye, there's a wavy tail or trunk or flagellum coming out. So it's like an elephant's trunk, but it does two sinusoidal waves, and it's just an amazing creature. I
yeah,
want it to be real.
and what the memo just described was like one of the very first Loch Ness monster sightings made by the Spicers. I don't know what. I think George Spicer is the name of the husband, and like in 1933 they were driving across the road next to the loch.
Uh-huh.
Then they saw this thing that Memo just described, like blubbling across the road into the lake. And that was basically what started the Loch Ness monster craze. Although there were one or two people who seen it a bit before them.
This was around the time of these extremely bizarre, like monster sightings around the UK. Like there's like in similar times, correct me if I'm mistaken, but there are also sightings of something like a horse with a human head and like some all other weird sorts of Scottish things. I don't
I
know.
never heard of that actually.
Well, maybe I might be confusing with some other time, but around the turn of interwar years in the 1920s or like late 1910s, I believe somewhere up in the northern UK, there was a sighting. I wish I had a stronger memory, but there was a sighting of this roadside creature which looked like a kind of horse with a human head. So really bizarre.
So like a centaur but lame.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, true, very, very true.
Yeah.
Did you ever travel to Loch Ness?
No, but I always wanted to as a kid. But wait,
What?
let's go back to this point with like the gastropod explanation because
Okay,
like I
okay.
told you that like this was the way the monster was very first described, and there were a couple of other sightings where people described the head or like proboscis of Nessie as being retractable into the body,
Ah,
which reminds one heavily of a snail or a slug.
yeah, yeah. Or a sea cucumber.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, kind of makes sense in the way that if something like this existed, it could hide remarkably well. I mean, it would just need to find a fissure in the rocks and maybe sleep in it for 20 years or something. So
Yeah.
maybe an extreme low metabolism creature.
Yeah, that's the thing with like most of the explanations that say like it's a plesiosaur or some extinct whale or something. Like these are air-breathing creatures with a high metabolism, so you would see them a lot more often and probably at much higher population counts.
Yeah, I mean, in the
While
very
with an
least,
invertebrate, it can like hibernate in like the bottom of the loch, and it might make sense that you only see like once every 2 years.
yeah, I mean, or it could be a globster. Like, I also remember reading something about a secret connection between Loch Ness and the sea, but like, is there such a thing?
I mean, it is connected through the river Ness to the sea, which is a pretty short river. So, and
Ah,
there are, I think there are recorded cases where at least some animals from the sea really did, like seals and sometimes even dolphins, really did
mhm,
swim up into the loch for a short amount of
mhm.
time.
Ooh, well, I think a seal, a lake-bound seal also makes a lot of sense. And there are seals like that. Some of the like one of them is one of the most mysterious animals
The
on Earth.
Baikal one.
Yeah, yeah. Like out in the middle of nowhere. How did it get there? Who knows? But still, there's a like a species of seal living in one extremely isolated lake in the middle of Central Asia, and there's like a real life weirdness that's as strange as any cryptid out there, but because it's real, people don't give two figs about it.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing. Lake Baikal also has its own sea monster legend.
Oh,
Yeah. It's like
um,
another Nessie knockoff, like the ones in America.
is that the one where the Russians did a Russian experiment and dived to the bottom of the lake only to see frog people or something?
I no, not as far as I am aware.
Hmm.
I never heard of that story.
Maybe I'm confusing another lake because there's a few lakes around that area. Anyways.
Yeah. So like yeah, the gastropod one, I I do prefer, but I need to first. I think it goes without saying that I don't believe that there is an actual monster in the lake. But
I mean,
I'm still split between two camps. Like one is the possibility that this really is just an entirely psychological phenomenon. Like someone started a rumor once and then it got really out of hand, and now everyone, if they see something slightly weird in the Loch Ness, they immediately think, oh, it's Nessie. That's like the one possibility I think like I stand for. Or the second one is that there is an actual like natural phenomenon at the lake that causes all these sightings. And by that, I don't mean like a large undiscovered animal, but I don't know, maybe like a population of large eels or like zeiches. You know what that is?
oh, is it that big catfish or
No,
no?
no, that's that's a hydrological phenomenon where wind and the shape of the lake produce a standing wave,
Ah,
which
okay, okay. I
looks
know
like
what you're. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
which can look like the back of some animal swimming through the water. And I think there are some calculations that these are actually very common at the Loch Ness,
Well,
to the way it is shaped and how the wind flows into the bassin.
well, I'll add my own theory, and it's more about human psychology in the modern age. That there's this thing where there are certain parts of the world which feel to the great majority of people like discovery place. I mean, it's amazing how contextual people are. I mean, for example, I was on holiday and with my father-in-law, yeah, I was just collecting flies from their porch light because maybe there's a chance they might be undescribed species, and they were kind of fascinated, but because they expect flies to be found in like a new species to be found in a jungle or a remote mountaintop or something. Never occurs to people that everyday life can get really weird, and the converse also holds true that when people like, especially when legendary spots like Loch Ness or the Amazon or like darkest Africa have been created, people go in there wanting to believe and wanting to observe. So I don't know, somebody could be like sailing across the river Rhine or the Bosphorus or like some boring part of the world, and there could be something in the sea. No one would care about it. But if they're in like an area that has already been marked as a like important place, like Loch Ness, then every branch is a lake monster. Every sound, because you go there with a kind of credulous mindset. You already go primed, like all oiled up and ready to go. So that's, I think, so maybe in the very, very beginning, there might have been a phenomena as you described, but after that whole media frenzy, it all took a life of its own. And I think, I mean, maybe that whole issue needs to be considered in terms of post-war development across Britain. And there was also, like, after World War II, America really rebounded like crazy. Heck, even like parts of Germany had a higher rate of economic recovery than parts of the UK. So maybe it could be seen in that economic or social perspective.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, one of the sightings before the famous Spicer one was made by a woman named Ellie Mackenzie, and I think she just described that she saw a vague shape in the loch, that a fish as large as a whale. That was her description. And but if you look into her background, she owned a hotel by the loch. And of course, who would profit the most from increased tourism to this place but a hotel owner?
Yeah. And that whole time was an era where like the old imperial prosperity of the United Kingdom was decreasing. So there used to be a lot of places during the Gilded Age where people with lots of money could like go on a holiday or something. Then it was a kind of sad part, like almost those Hammer House of horror atmosphere. Not in terms of mummies or blood-soaked monsters, but if you watch these Hammer House of horror movies, they're all set in some sort of countryside manner. There's a doctor researching, there's an old lady in a house somewhere. And I mean, these are not coincidental. That was like part and parcel of the UK landscape. So those very poignant times, and it almost like they wanted a sort of tourist interest. So there's a maybe a quasi Marxist reading of the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Let's go back to like weird explanations. Like this is probably my favorite sighting.
Oh, I'm looking at an amazing animal. Imagine a camel, but it's got a little like slightly reptilian tail, but not too big. It's like the tail of a golden retriever, but it's kind of pointed like that of a reptile. It's shaggy all over. Now, the similarity to a camel ends in the feet and the neck. The feet are they kind of have like don't have hooves or camel pads, but they have like big hand-like digits. And then the front side is an enormously extended snorkel-like neck, and it's just a beautiful animal. It looks like a cross between a camel and a sauropod, or a camel and a Scylophysis, a small theropod.
Yeah. And what the memo just described is the so-called Fordyce sighting made by a guy named Colonel Fordyce. He claims to have seen this by the loch in 1932, but he did not report this until 1990.
Ooh.
But yeah, basically he said that this was the Loch Ness Monster, which is basically a bizarro camel thing. And
so did he see it on land?
Yeah, he saw it walking through the forest right beside the loch. And what I love about this sighting is that it implies something very funny. And I have to give credit for this idea to Robert Watson, because I got it after reading his blog. Like, imagine what if we don't see Nessie that often in the lake because it does not actually live in the lake. What if it actually is like a llama or a guanaco, like some bizarre mammal from the Pleistocene that lives in like the mountain range right next to Loch Ness, and it occasionally just goes swimming in the loch. So we never found Nessie because we've just been looking in the wrong place.
Well, I mean, to this theory's credit, the drawing you showed me looks exactly like some. I hate to use the word, but a normie's idea of a Pleistocene weird mammal. So, I mean, I have to at least give it logistical credit. So there are a number of these weird, like I had never seen any of the things you showed me, and with each display of a weird creature, I feel more and more enlightened.
Yeah, there were a couple of other like there was this like one landscape painter who claimed to have encountered the Nessie right up close, like bathing in the sun. I think you showed it off in one of your other videos, and it was like this weird seahorse-like thing. Do you remember?
Oh, yes, 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 I remember.
Yeah, with like this like tube mouth, like right out of it kind of looked like Titanosaurus from the Godzilla movies.
Maybe, maybe. I mean, it's amazing how all of these encounters they describe creatures that could be either a new class or a new phylum or like an entirely new lineage of creatures. But there's nothing that looks like a big brown seal or something like a reddish but larger sea otter, which is what you would expect if this was a real
Yeah.
like animal that evolved in the way we know that animals evolve.
Yeah,
So
right. Why aren't there more cryptids that are just slightly unusual whales or slightly unusual seals? It's always something extravagant like a surviving plesiosaur.
So I want to ask you something. If someone wants to like read up on Nessie or lake monsters, but doesn't know where to begin, like what is the first book that you would recommend to him or her?
Good
Aside
question.
from your amazing blog at manospondylus.blogspot.com, of course.
Well, on my blog I wrote about cryptids only once. I wrote about the Lariosauro, which is like a lake monster from northern Italy that has like a very bizarre history behind it. But yeah, like I mean, if you want to go for skeptical literature, there is of course Darren Naish and his book Hunting Monsters, and then there is also Abominable Science by Daniel Loxton and Don Prothero, which is also great. It has like it goes into detail about like Bigfoot, Nessie, and Mokele and Bembe and all those cryptids, and how the history behind them is like very sketchy.
I'm also now asking for myself also, but if we
Yeah.
want to just read a great compilation of lake monster reports that's kind of unbiased but also comprehensive, like is there such a book or a site? Because there are UFO books like that which just give you a list of sightings and encounters, and it kind of doesn't push an agenda or an explanation.
Well,
Is there something similar?
I don't know a book like that. It's just a list of records. But like as I mentioned, there is this one blog by a guy. I think his name is Robert Watson, and it's just called the Loch Ness Monster Blog. And like I don't know, I'm kind of split on him. Like on one hand, he does a good job at like cataloging almost everything that is connected to Nessie, like every possible sighting there has been. But on the other hand, he is also an ultra believer. Like he's an Agent Mulder kind of guy. Who I think like he hates Darren Naish and every other skeptic who says Nessie isn't real, and he is low-key a bit vitriolic to those people. So that's like what my one big criticism to him. Like he could be a bit more respectful to skeptics, because I think skeptics have a lot of good points for doubting the existence of Nessie. But otherwise, his blog is very nice to read too, I must say.
The link is in the video description, everyone. Oh, so there. So in your part of the world, which is Switzerland, are there any local lake monsters?
Like a few years ago, but I'm looking up if I said the name of the guy correctly. Just wait a second. Let's see. No, Roland Watson is his name. Roland Watson. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Well, like a few years ago, when I was on the internet on some weird forum, I read about one report from some weird lake monster that was seen in Lac Le Mans in Geneva, but I never found anything again on that. So I'm not sure if that was even real what I read, or if I just imagined that. But there is like there are a lot of weird cryptids from the Alps. Like the most famous one internationally is probably the Tatzelwurm.
Yes. The famous cat monster.
Yeah, I mean, there's differing descriptions of it. Like there are some descriptions that portrayed as like a snake with two hands and a cat face, but there's also more sensible reconstructions dating back even to the Middle Ages, where it's basically like a Gila monster with only front legs.
I mean, that's something like that is completely possible in my point of view.
That's the thing. It's a very fascinating thing to think about. It really, because it is a small animal. It has a typical reptile shape. The only odd thing about it is that it has only two front legs, but there are real life lizards that are like that. Like there is this like
Bipes biporus, the Mexican burrowing lizard.
That's the exact one I was thinking of. Yeah.
And also, I mean, in Europe right now, you have a species of giant lizards, which are snake-like. They are one of the biggest land-living lizards in Eurasia, and they're armor-plated. They are Ophisaurus apodus. Some people now call them Pseudopus apodus, but it's like a genuine reptile that lives in continental Europe, and no one bats an eyelid about it. So it's not impossible for something like this to have existed in the Alps, and then as people kind of advanced their civilization, this was somehow wiped out. Because we always think in terms of like rare island birds getting extinct, but I'm sure in Eurasia, heckin' lot of extinctions must have happened as people were establishing their farmlands all over the place. So there's my 5 cents about this whole thing.
Yeah, so there is the Tatzelwurm, and connected to that, because it was often seen as like a lesser dragon in like the old medieval folk tales. And there's a lot of dragon legends from the mountain Pilatus. Like throughout the centuries, people reported actually seeing dragons like fly up and down the mountain and around it.
Now that is something I don't know about.
And there is like an account by Johann Jakob Scheuchzer, who is famous for like misidentifying this one fossil as a guy who died in the Great Flood. But like
yes.
Like the funny thing is, like he actually examined some of these dragon reports, and he examined them much as like a modern skeptic would UFO reports. He like points out, look, we don't know if this is actually true what this guy said. The dimensions he tells are totally unrealistic and stuff like that.
So and what did like, the dragons look like? Like did they have a
like
tail?
They describe it as like kilometer wide wings, like something like Godzilla sized, flying across the
Rodan.
Flying across the sky and breathing fire. And there is even one case where one dragon was flying close to Lucerne and dropped a ball.
Oh my God.
And, like a family, and this ball is real. Like a family has kept it until modern day. It's in a museum now. This like ball that allegedly was dropped by a dragon.
Is it like a sphere? What does it look like?
Yeah, it looks like it is a sphere. Yeah. And like first people like some researchers theorized that it could have been a meteorite maybe, and then they examined it, and then they found out it's apparently mostly made out of clay. So it probably was just a medieval forgery.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about like a ball dropped by a kilometers wide dragon, I think of something like with scales and like maybe like the egg of an alien, or maybe even something biomechanical. But it's just fascinating. I mean, kilometers wide, eh? It also reminds me of all these weird, like 1600, 1700 sightings all around Europe. There were like these giant shields flying in the sky and like this enormous black arrowhead darkening the
Yeah, that
skies of.
happened over Basel, I believe. Also here in Switzerland, where like people reported seeing like an aerial battle right out of Star Wars, but like in the late medieval ages, happening right above their heads. And still unclear what people probably saw that day. It probably was just some weird meteorological phenomenon where light was reflected in odd shapes. But
Or
who knows?
maybe it was the space armada that landed Isaac Newton on the world just around then. And he went on to invent physics and optics and revolutionized our view of the world, which caused massive probability collapse and killed all the ghosts, jinns, lake monsters, and other memetic quantum organisms that had been sharing the world with humans after that. But yeah, folks, that's the true history of the world.
I approve this message.
It's like it's complete self-contained hypothesis that you can't argue against, but it just feels good to play those games sometimes. All right, so that was like a wild ride from the shores of Loch Ness to the skies above Europe. We took a brief tangent in US religious millenarialism or something, but it was really nice. I mean, once again, I'm kind of out of my depth here. I know like maybe 1/10 of what you just described, and maybe a smattering of American sea monster lore. So, any questions you might want to address me, or before we say goodbyes?
Yeah, what cryptid do you want to talk about next?
Oh, okay, very nice one. Uh, how about we do an African deep dive and like basically go over all those weird
Oh,
colonial cryptids reported from Africa.
oh
Con-
dear.
or maybe we could limit it to Madagascar, Malagasy cryptids, uh, Vorompatra, Tratra, etc. There are all these like weird things from Madagascar as well. Maybe it's good to narrow the scope. So maybe a cryptid expedition to Madagascar is in
Yeah.
order. What do you
Or what
think?
if we talk about big apes?
Oh,
Like,
big apes. Okay, I mean,
like,
once again, there you would be the expert because big apes. I mean, don't want to ruffle any feathers, but big apes to me were always like the slightly boring cryptids. They're
yeah,
like
for me
monkey.
too, but
Okay,
there are some intriguing things about like the theories around like what could Bigfoot be if it were real? Like, would it be like a hominin, or would it be like an orangutan descendant? Is it related to Gigantopithecus? Is it a Neanderthal and
mm,
stuff like that?
well, I personally believe that at least one of those, the orang pendek, was like a completely real thing. Either Homo
Yeah, like
floresiensis.
the orang pendek is very interesting because it is actually one of those candidates for cryptids that might have been real. And you even write about that in the cryptozoologicon.
Well, also like even Bigfoot itself, like until very recently, when we saw how like obviously fake all those footprints and those frozen bodies were, until recently it was very easy to like get swept up by that because that whole habitat, northernmost North America, is an enormous place, and you never know. I mean, the ecological niche is there, so in that respect, it's kind of plausible. And once more, my mind goes back to this one night when John Conway, I, and Darren Nash got drunk and convinced each other that something was out there. And all we had to do was to somehow scrape up 10,000 pounds, buy some of the Dan newfangled camera traps, buy some plane tickets, rent a car, and let's fucking go. We could have done that, but the next morning we were like, okay, let's never talk about last night ever again.
I mean, that would have been made probably for one of the funniest documentaries ever. Like there is this, I think it was on Animal Planet or something. There was this scripted reality documentary about like Bigfoot hunters,
Uh huh.
and instead of being a real documentary, it's like it's a mockumentary where they actually meet these things and they fight them, like they want to hunt them and stuff. And it's like it's written like a soap opera. It's pretty entertaining.
It reminds me of WrestleMania.
Yeah, exactly that kind of writing, but with like these Appalachian duck hunters versus Bigfoot or Grassman or the Jersey Devil. Like like in one episode they find out Bigfoot has mated with the Grassman. This is not good.
Oh no, there's gonna be a new contender.
Yeah.
Well, we could do those too. Yeah, I mean, let's do that. Yeah, Monkey Man. Also, do we want to say to our millions of viewers something about the upcoming TetZooCon event?
Yeah, like you will be there, I will be there.
Yes. So TK and I will be semi-hacking the TetZooCon this year, which will be held between, what was the date?
The 3rd and the 4th of December.
3rd and the 4th of December in London, King's College somewhere. The link is below in the video description. If you attend the event, I will be bringing along CMTK podcast postcards, memento cards, and we will be able to sign them for you. So there, meet us up. This is not a registered event, but it's like a side gig that
I'm just there as a visitor, but you will have a talk, right?
Yeah. I'll be talking about the 10th anniversary of the coming of Marduk. No, the 10th anniversary 10th anniversary of all yesterdays, the dinosaur book we wrote and illustrated with John Conway and Darren Nash, and also with amazing skeleton diagrams by Scott Hartman. So I can't believe it's been 10 years already, but yeah.
Yeah, me neither.
So there, TetZooCon. If you're there, make sure to meet us, and it's just gonna be lovely. And please also remember to support us on Patreon, because we're gonna be going to London, and we really need the cash, man. So there.
Yeah.
So that's
See you all there. I hope to meet some lovely people, and if not, I don't know.
Okay. So have a nice day, everyone. Thank you for your time, TK. This was the CMTK Lake podcast.
And next time, the CMTK Turkmen podcast. I mean, come on, that's what like Bigfoot looks like. He could be related to me.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there are, in this part of the world, there are so many nationalities with pursuit, man. I don't know. It could be we could be making the argument, did Bigfoot come over from Central Asia riding around on ponies, or was it already in Anatolia when Turks arrived? Who knows? But there's a distinct Turkish community among Spec Evo enthusiasts, and so there. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, it's something to look forward to next time. Yeah, this has been me, TK Sifkin, and there, CM Kozeman. I hope you had a nice time listening. Goodbye, everybody. See you all at TetZooCon.
Ciao.